Tuesday was an eventful day. A summit of foreign ministers on the Danish island of Bornholm for the Nordic Baltic cooperation NBA took place. The day marked 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency and an end to the Three Seas summit in Warsaw. A lot has been said, even more was done, but a lot is at stake. So to discuss the above, I'm joined by Velina Tchakarova, founder at the FACE Geopolitical Consultancy. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's begin with 100 days of Donald Trump. Tuesday marks that very day. What is your assessment of his administration 100 days in terms of impact on the Central and Eastern Europe region?
Well, without a doubt, we are feeling really a high impact derived from a lot of the actions and decision-making in Washington, here in Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, mostly linked to the deal-making process linked to Ukraine, but also obviously linked to the now generally changed attitude towards European partners and allies. So we have two-track process. One that entails the tariffs policies coming from Washington, of course, under the guidance of Trump. Now we have 90 days of kind of period to rethink what we should do collectively as European Union. And then, of course, we have the bigger issue, in my view, especially when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, and that is what kind of peace process, what kind of ceasefire is going to be facilitated and maybe even pushed by the US administration under Trump's guidance. These are the two questions.
Obviously, from the regional perspective, one of the biggest questions is how the U.S. is going to further support Ukraine and how is it going to aid the ceasefire. Previously, we've heard from President Trump, actually in one of our reports during his interview, saying that Volodymyr Zelensky is a difficult person to work with and to negotiate with. Do you think that there is still a chance that Mr. Trump is going to warm up to Mr. Zelensky? And are they going to find common ground, especially when it comes to the question of seizing territory to Russia?
What does it mean finding common ground when we are dealing with diametrically opposed goals? Trump wants quick ceasefire. He even pursues a peace plan that practically is based on more or less territorial, political, even if you like, economic concessions on behalf of Ukraine. And at the same time, we should not forget that this is not just a peace plan meant for Ukraine and imposed on Ukraine. It is also about the relaunch of strategic dialogue with Russia. That means that we are dealing now with a completely new geopolitical situation between the United States and Russia that has nothing to do with Ukraine in a direct way. It has even nothing to do with the European allies, because they are being sidelined in both tracks of the process. So I don't take Trump's statements at face value when he makes this kind of assessments about personal qualities of one or other leader, but I see a pattern of behavior here, and that is that we must prepare ourselves for some sort of ceasefire. At least ceasefire, I think, is the minimum, coupled with these probably minerals deals that Trump wants Ukraine to sign. But of course, we also need to, prepare ourselves for this post-ceasefire period, what it means for the Russian leadership, how they will use the period to prepare themselves for the next, let's say, phase of operations, because let's be real. Ceasefire will only postpone, but will not actually stop the Russian goals from implementation. And the Russian goals, as we've heard from the Russian leadership just recently, they once again restated the same goals as of 2022, when the first ceasefire process was initiated, and they are very much the same, quite identical. So here we have now the situation where European powers, especially here in Central and Eastern European countries, are more or less, of course, behind Zelensky and behind Ukraine. But then again, we have to face a kind of bifurcation of Europe, right? Because it will mean that we have to accept that our most important strategic partner is also re-engaging with the strategic rival, with the country that seeks the subjugation of the second largest European country, and by extension also the destruction of the European security architecture.
So how do you think that the US could actually exert pressure on Russia? Does it hold the cards? Because so far we've seen that the US exerted pressure on Ukraine. Are we going to see something similar because of how the political landscape is starting to look like?
Yeah, so far it looks like more of a use of carrots rather than sticks when it comes to, Russia. But of course, I would not exclude let's say, the combined approach where the US still can actually impose sanctions, for instance, on the energy or financial sector. And right now we know for a fact that the Russian economy is hurting because of the already imposed sanctions on behalf of the US leadership, already starting with Biden administration when it comes to LNG, when it comes to shadow fleet and so on. Then again, I think when it comes to carrots, here we see two tracks, right? We see also US-Iran talks, and I think that there is some kind of incentive also linked to the Russian, leadership to some sort of help the US-Iran process also to proceed. And maybe, the situation is in a way kind of intertwined, in my view. So I don't see, honestly, a lot of, niches for the US administration to really impose a lot of pressure on Moscow right now, on the Kremlin. Why? Because the Kremlin is holding the Chinese cards. And basically, the fear on behalf of America is that this modus operandi between China and Russia is becoming far too deep and far too dangerous for the American
network
interests.
of dependencies.
Yes.
The network of dependencies. Let's jump into the Nordic Baltic Cooperation NB8. Definitely an important meeting of the foreign ministers. What are the biggest takeaways, in your opinion?
From the meeting of the foreign ministers in...
Yes, Bornholm.
Well, first and foremost, it's a working format. Now they have included also more, foreign ministers, which is a good thing. It is a format to engage in the Nordic dimension of the European security, where in most recent times we had a lot of interruption, a lot of hybrid forms of warfare. So these things can be only addressed collectively because they have cascading effects when it comes to data cables, telecommunication, energy infrastructure, and so on. So basically the idea here is to have a kind of format for the foreign ministers to engage with each other, to coordinate measures, to create more interoperability, which I think is one of the biggest takeaways. For instance, when it comes to patrolling mission, which obviously is also to be seen as a format within NATO / European Union, right? So in a sense, it's about communicating, it's about coordinating, it's about deepening interoperability, and it's about filling some political leadership into this kind of format. So the very fact that France was also part of it. Now Poland is obviously already a casual invited site, and then we have practically France, Germany, and Nordic states. I think is really the realization, and this is my personal takeaway, that the Arctic and the Nordic, dimension of our energy, / security / frontier border issues is going to be linked also to the European, Eastern European and the Southern European frontier. So we will have a three-dimensional kind of approach in the future, unfortunately. So we are opening up a new front, so to say, to take care of.
So many fronts to take care of these days. And finally, we arrive at the subject of the Three Seas Initiative Summit, day 2. So far, in your opinion, has it delivered its promises?
Well, it depends on whom you ask. And it depends, of course, also on what kind of expectations you have about the format. If you ask my personal, of course, about my personal assessment, given that I've been following the initiative right from the beginning, the initiative has delivered quantitatively and qualitatively. Why? Because
in what sense?
As we speak, we have, the 10th anniversary, which is in itself is a proof of, so to say, perseverance. It is a proof of political leadership behind it. Now, this is a non-institutionalized format, I must also say. That means that on the level of political leadership, we have the presidents, mostly the presidents, representing the 13 member states of countries that more or less built this, not just this former Soviet bloc of countries of Central Eastern Europe, but actually I would present it as the 13 members which are kind of building this Adriatic, Black Sea, Baltic Sea kind of zone. So it's about the three seas. So this is the political leadership. And second important point is the representation of business. The very fact that we had more than 200 representatives from businesses, from companies from these 13 countries, plus associate partners, I think, and I would argue, is a kind of a very good signal towards a successful 10th anniversary. It's
interesting that you say it, because we've heard on one of our shows, Adam Jaser's On the Record, he spoke to former Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović. They spoke about the Three Seas initiative, and she said that she's happy that the initiative survived, as it does not have any permanent structures. For one of the founding persons to actually say that she's happy about the structure actually surviving is quite an interesting way to put it. What are the fields that the initiative is lacking in? Because we know about the challenges with politicization, we know about the funding issues as well. So how are those going to be addressed? Well,
of course, she rightfully pointed out as being one of the founding mothers, actually, of this initiative, right? 10 years ago, to highlight one of the big problems, and that is consistency. It is mostly linked, of course, to political leadership. Why? Because governments come and go, but it's not so easy to convince governments of one or other initiative, right? So here it is about the consistency of the format, because some argue, and I do not share this opinion, but some argue that there is a lack of institutionalization of this initiative. There is no secretariat, there is no, legal form of it, so to say. This cannot guarantee the persistence of, of the initiative. Basically meaning that leaderships in each of the countries are changing. We are all democracies, and this might create the risk that next leadership might not see, not see the incentive of continuing with this initiative. I think the second important, let's say, hurdle would be the longevity of these projects. We are talking about the lack of 1 trillion physical, mostly physical infrastructure that goes from north to south, north-south connectivity. When I say physical infrastructure, of course, I mean highways, I mean railways. We are talking about connecting people to people, not only businesses to businesses. And we know for a fact that this is actually the job of governments. But when we talk about European Union members, because all of these countries are European Union members, so they have actually the institutional umbrella of the European Union, it's mostly about how to coordinate such complex processes that take years of building between governments, right? So I think that the first initial phase, let's say the first 10 years, are well survived. I wouldn't be so harsh with my assessment on the initiative, but then again, I would call for more, courageous stance on that matter, just to, avoid politicization is, I think, very important, to avoid further complicated institutionalization of the initiative, and to stick to what we have already within the European Union. The European Union is a strategic partner. Americans are a strategic partner. We can keep this, initiative in a sense to keep the Americans busy on this part of the old continent, right?
And yet there are so many moving elements, as you mentioned yourself. It's very hard to predict what the future holds, especially now that we are going to see Andrzej Duda the Polish president leave office because we have the upcoming election in May of this year. Thank you so much, Velina Tchakarova, founder, FACE Geopolitical Consultancy. Pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now here on the World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we'll see you there.